Hi everyone, Anthony Cuttano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time to check and make sure the microphone is on, and guess what? It's on. It's also time for a review of the new Dirty Projectors album. It's self-titled. This is the latest incarnation of the long-beloved indie and experimental music project, the Dirty Projectors, spearheaded by singer-songwriter and multi-instrumentalist Mr. David Longstreth, now continuing Dirty Projectors as a solo venture after the departure of the band's rhythm section and its star vocalists, Angel Deradorian and Amber Kaufman, the latter of whom David was romantically involved with when she joined the band, and this album is, I guess, kind of a musical and artistic reflection on the demise of that romantic relationship. It's a breakup album. It's a breakup album, everybody. Get ready for critical acclaim across the board. But this record is not just David rising from the ashes like a phoenix in the romantic sense, also in the musical sense. Because David has taken this opportunity to completely overhaul the sound of Dirty Projectors, not only with some pretty public statements on how indie's so old and out of touch and passé and isn't providing anything in terms of context or meaning in these troublesome and very bad and bougie times. All of this was covered pretty heavily in the music press, but also with the teaser tracks leading up to the release of this new album, which had David pointing in the direction of alternative R&B, which in a way is not really all that surprising because David seems pretty focused on keeping up with the times. He also had some spectacular musical input on that Solange album, A Seat at the Table, that dropped not too long ago. Though still, I was pretty skeptical of David taking the Dirty Projectors sound in this direction on this new album. I remember reacting pretty negatively to the song Keep Your Name when I first heard it, thinking the way that he kind of pitched his vocals lower throughout much of the track was as just being a little gimmicky. But after hearing the full scope of David's vision on this entire record, I have to say that this thing is one of the more refreshing albums to drop in this musical style this decade. Maybe not the most challenging feat, considering that 80% of alternative R&B right now are just people who are ripping off The Weeknd, but David does a pretty good job on this album of translating his very eclectic musical and lyrical style into the very smooth and sensual and sweet sounds of R&B. He also makes sure to add plenty of odd experimental quirks into the production too. It's a good balance of weird and gorgeous and emotionally moving and moving the genre forward, because on this album David effectively carves out a little niche for himself in this genre on his first try. There are a few points where I think some of his songwriting or production comes off a bit bland or succumbs to the trendiness of the sound that he's playing in, like the track Winner Take Nothing, probably the least risky song on the entire record. David even indulges in these old commercial R&B like vocal harmonies here and there on the track that sound a little goofy. And despite being reduced down to a one piece, David still insists on incorporating these chirpy vocal harmonies into his compositions on his songs, but the thing is, he's recording those vocals now. It's not Amber and Angel, and while it's still compositionally interesting, hearing one David Longstreth layered over another again and again and again on a single track, considering how idiosyncratic his voice is, it does get a little grating, like on the song Death Spiral. The song Work Together is equally gaudy with its vocal layering, and the synth bass and the percussion patches on this thing, they're so flat, they're so dry, it sounds like he didn't really put any effects on them. It just sounds like the product of some SoundCloud bedroom producer. I just wish some of the beats and some of the synths on this thing were a bit more dynamic, had more sonic depth to them. And the auto-tune that David puts on his vocals on Ascent Through Clouds does his voice no favors whatsoever. It's just a gimmicky sound that adds nothing to the song itself, as the first third of the track is this Baroque folk ballad that's very pretty and sounds like something that could have been on one of Dirty Projectors' 2 past albums. After this passage in the song, we kind of get these weird, glitchy, driving beats and vocalizations that sound very James Blakeian. I appreciate the vocal acrobatics, but again, this is one of the moments on the album where I feel like David succumbs to the trend that he's playing in a little bit. But outside of these tracks, I would say the rest of the album is really well written, very inventive, and beautiful. I love the reggae undertones of the song Cool Your Heart with Dawn Dawn. Her vocals add a lot to the track. I like the chirpy organs on the song that sort of emphasize the upbeat. Meanwhile, there's all this polyrhythmic mayhem going on underneath, which is occasionally interrupted with these stuttering, glitchy. It's an odd sound, but Dave and Dawn's vocals do a lot to warm the instrumental up and just make it sound really pretty, with all these expressive, passionate vocals. Also, the funky drum bridge on this track sounds like something off of a Tune Yards album. It's very fruity, it's very tropical, while also sounding like it's from another dimension. The organs on the song I See You take on more of a gospel tone, I would say. Dave's voice also kind of steps in that direction. I love that after all of these very sad and personal and emotionally traumatic songs, Dave kind of finishes the record off on a bit of a high note, especially after heartbreaking tracks like Little Bubble, where the lyrics are especially gripping. On this track, David kind of reflects on the love that he had with Amber as being like this enclosure, being this bubble, being this refuge that is gone now. And he's very sentimental about it too, as he sings about having his own little bubble for a while. And I love the many musical passages and flavors of this song too. There are beautiful acoustic guitar passages on this thing that melt into these digital chords, these synthetic soundscapes. Then these other passages with these charming piano chords that are matched with like these weird tinny distorted drones. The song Up in Hudson is a great single on the album, beautiful vocal harmonies at the start that melt into some wonderful horn sections. And the track goes into a very cute story of how David and Amber met, how she joined the band, how they had other girlfriends and boyfriends at the time and they dropped all of that to be together. One thing I think that's sort of interesting and unique about this breakup album is there's not even really a hint of bitterness to it. I mean, there are certainly some very sad points on it, but David doesn't really go into the nitty-gritty of what made their relationship dysfunctional. For the most part, he seems to look back on it in a very positive light, even on the song Keep Your Name, where he seems to be directly addressing the romantic and also creative differences that he and Amber seem to be having as they were working on the same musical project together. And this track even warmed up to me a little bit as I listened to the album more and more. I sort of got past what I felt like and still kind of feel like are the gimmicky lead vocals. What made the track shine for me are not only the beautiful melodies and the great chord progression of the track, but also some of the lyrics on here. I love the one moment where David says, what we imagined and what we became, and this idea of leaving sort of this relationship, I guess the romantic and the creative relationship, keeping your name, whether I guess sort of that's in the sense of getting married together or sort of being in a different musical project or something. It's a really haunting track, especially as David sings parts like, what I want out of art is truth, what you want is fame. Probably the closest David comes on this album to like lobbing a critique at the other person, or maybe he's singing from her standpoint. I'm not really sure. There's also a weird rap passage on the track that I'm not entirely sure I'm all that into, not just because I don't care for the sound of it, but I'm not really all that enamored with the lyrics on this part. My body said Naomi Klein. Ooh. Still though, overall, I think this is a good album. I think it's an entertaining album. I think it's a sweet, beautiful, intriguing album. Very personal record, a good return for Dirty Projectors, and an admirable attempt at trying something new. I still think there are some kinks to work out if David's going to continue in this style, which I kind of doubt he's going to. I mean, once this trend is out and it's become passé, David will most likely move on to something else, which is fine. Not necessarily anything wrong with that. Not necessarily anything wrong with this change in style, because even as David has attempted to play within the world of alternative R&B on this record, a lot of his compositional quirks, a lot of his lyrical quirks, as I said, from his past records, from the Dirty Projectors, typical sound, carried over onto this album in a really obvious way, in a way that if you are a Dirty Projectors fan, this is still very recognizably a David Longstreth album. All that being said, I'm feeling a light to decent 7 on this album. Transition. Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe. And please don't cry if you're mad at this review. Though I don't see why you would be. I mean, it's a pretty good album. I think it's pretty good. Though I do foresee it being a polarizing album. I mean, there are going to be a lot of Dirty Projectors fans who hate this thing. And I think there will be some, though, who enjoy it, and there's also the potential for newcomers to come along and, you know, sort of enjoy what David is doing, but I digress. All sorts of links next to my head, other videos, subscribe to the channel, official website too. You're the best forever.